Well, the Tigers protect 3 players from the Rule 5 drafts. We'll talk about who was added, who wasn't added, who was DFA'd, and much, much more. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place just a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome in, everybody. Happy Wednesday. So, we have, obviously, yesterday's show, we previewed the Detroit Tigers' decisions that were looming by the 6 p.m. on Tuesday deadline, where they had to add Rule 5 draft eligible players to their 40-man roster, or else those players would be, obviously, get ready for this, Rule 5 eligible. So, they end up protecting 3 players, and we talked a lot about some of the key names yesterday. There wasn't a big surprise name this year of somebody totally off the wall that not very many people expected, but everybody was at like a 50% or less chance. You know what I mean? Like there was certainly Tyler Madison was added. We talked about him a lot yesterday. He was one of the guys that I think probably was the clubhouse leader. He probably had the highest chance of getting added, but even his, I would argue, going in, from where I felt yesterday was probably at 50-50 at best, and he was the highest, and everybody else, varying levels of lower than that. So the fact that they added 3 players, I think, is noteworthy. That also means they have to remove 3 players currently from the 40-man, so we'll obviously talk about that. And then we'll talk about all the players that didn't get added who may be taken in the Rule 5 draft, who the Tigers may risk losing, which has not happened in quite some time. Then we'll talk about some other smaller stuff. AL Manager of the Year was announced. AJ Hinch didn't win. Qualifying offers, all decisions on that were due on Tuesday afternoon as well. We'll talk about that. The Tigers had the Arizona Fall League MVP. We'll talk about that. And then on Wednesday evening, I think 6 p.m. Eastern, we will discuss the Cy Young Award announcement that will come today as you are listening to this. So let's get started here with the additions the Tigers made. The Tigers officially add Tyler Madison, Chase Lee, and Tyler Owens all to the 40-man roster. So I think the first thing that jumps out at me here is the fact that they're all right-handed relief pitchers. All 3 of these guys going to be relievers as they get promoted and as they get to the next level, and if they play Major League Baseball, and are all righties. All in their mid-20s, Madison 25, Chase Lee 26, and Tyler Owens 24 years old. Let's start with Madison. He had a 1.62 ERA in Double-A in 2023. Really, really, really good strikeout numbers as well. He's got a nice fastball. He's a guy who, when you look at the radar gun, you go, okay, like that's obviously solid, but it's not like blow it by you, right? Like mid-90s is where he sits, kind of velo-wise. But man, when you watch video on him, it really does play up. It feels like it's a lot going in a lot faster than just the 94, 95 that he usually sits around. So he's someone that I have really liked since we drafted him. Like I said yesterday, he was on the show in his draft year, talked about kind of his approach a little bit coming out of Bryant University. Got a really solid changeup as well. And then I think my favorite pitch of his is the curveball, and it's kind of sporadic. He'll kind of spray it all over the place, which is why he's not just immediately being added to the 40 man doesn't mean you're, like the closer all of a sudden. Like he's not even in the majors yet. So there's still some development to go with him in his career, but his curveball is really sharp. It's really nice. And I think that those three pitches tunneled together give hitters a lot of fits. He's also somebody that isn't platoon dominant. Like he, at least in the lower levels of the minors, he's been able to get both handed hitters out with relative frequency. And then, anytime you're talking about a sub-2 ERA over the course of over 30 innings, like he did in 2023, you're talking about obviously a pretty darn good season. So I'm really glad they protected him. The big thing with Madison, as we talked about yesterday, is the fact that he did not throw a single inning for the Detroit Tigers in 2024, in the Tigers organization, I should say, in 2024. Had Tommy John, did not pitch at all this season. So I think, as again we discussed yesterday, one of the reasons why they probably protected him, and Chris Brown of Tigers Minor League Report did a great job of kind of bringing this point to light, is that another organization could have drafted him in the Rule 5 and then just kept him on the IL until he was healthy, and not even used a major league roster spot technically to get him his minimum amount of days on the major league roster required for Rule 5 picks. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if he's ready for spring training. We'll see kind of what his timeline is this year. I'd imagine he starts off the season probably on the injured list, but if they start him off on the 60-day, then you can maybe even open up a 40-man roster spot again. So there's a lot of nuance to the conversation surrounding him. But on a very simple level, I am just very glad that they added him. And he is somebody that I really like, and that that I am excited to see what he can do as he gets promoted. I'm just really glad he's going to be healthy this year more than anything else. Chase Lee, the 26-year-old, had a 3.27 ERA in Toledo after the trade. Him and Tyler Owens, we both received from the Texas Rangers, not in the same trade. We traded with them, 50 times by the deadline. He had a 3.27 ERA with the Mud Hens this year. This guy's kind of fun because he's different. This is a side armor. He is really fun to watch pitch because it is so unique. You don't see too many guys that go straight up from the side anymore. Now, that also brings some limitations on what he can do with the baseball, right? Like submariners and side armors notoriously have low velocity because it's very hard to throw high velo from those angles. So this is a guy that, barely tops out at 90 miles an hour on a good day, but has a lot of spin, as also most side armors do. And I think that the biggest thing for me with Chase Lee that really intrigues me is, we hear about and see all the times these lefty specialists that are pitchers, right? Like these relievers that come in and just face a lefty. And before the 3-pitch minimum, especially, right, you'd have guys come in and face one batter and then get pulled from the game just to face a lefty and then get out of there. And that's obviously because lefty hitters struggle with lefty pitchers more, but you don't hear too much about righty specialists, at least not as much. There's a little bit more these days than there were. But I think that Chase Lee is somebody that I kind of eye as a potential righty specialist. In 2023, lefties hit him very, very well, but righties didn't. And righties did not hit him very well this season either in the minors. I really think that there is a route for long-term success and a long major league career from him. He'll never be a closer. He'll never be, this high-end, super high velo guy that everybody's trying to get their hands on or anything. But I think there is a valuable piece in a major league bullpen for him at some point in his career, just being a guy that you can rely on when you need to get a righty out. He still had really good strikeout numbers, really good swing and miss numbers, despite the low velocity. And in today's day and age, that's somewhat of an anomaly. So I think that has to do with, again, the spin, but also the angle being kind of funky and not what hitters are used to. I'm totally okay with them adding him to the 40 man as well. Not somebody I would have said going into it, on yesterday's show. I don't think I mentioned him as like a super high possibility, but he was in that second tier of, like most likely candidates. And that is why. And clearly the Tigers want to, get their more advanced pitching coaches have their hands on him as well, and see if maybe we can create and develop a guy that can get right-handed hitters out at the major league level pretty consistently. Let's talk about Tyler Owens, who is absolutely awesome. We will do that right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in. As always, making us your first listen every single day. Shots at the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow, continuing to talk, obviously, about the offseason. We also have some more important dates looming. One this Friday. Probably start that conversation tomorrow as well. But today we are talking about the players that the Tigers added to the 40-man roster to protect from the Rule 5 draft. And also, I know I'm really focusing on the protection of the Rule 5 draft, but this is, they're just on the 40. This is also a really big deal. One of my favorite questions that I remember asking Cody Clemens and Brendan White as well, when we had them on the show back in the day after they got added to the 40-man, that's a really big deal. You cannot play Major League Baseball, rather. You cannot play Major League Baseball if you are not on the 40-man roster. So that is a really big deal, whether it's to, protect them from the Rule 5 so no one else can poach them or not. Just getting on the 40-man and getting your contract purchased by the Major League team is a really big deal for guys. So I want to make sure that it's not just, it's all about the protection and it's all about, all of this is Rule 5 centered. Obviously, they want to make sure that these guys stay in the organization, but it's also just a really big deal for them. So I want to give them their flowers as well. Tyler Owens, the 24-year-old, also received from the Rangers, had a 3.31 ERA in Double-A Erie post acquiring him. This guy has really good stuff, and this is somebody that, along with Madison on yesterday's show, we talked about had a decent chance of getting protected because of that. I think there's a real argument that of all three of these guys, and honestly, all the guys we talked about yesterday, that he is the closest to being major league caliber right now. It's not to say he has the highest ceiling or he's going to be the best of all those guys necessarily, but I think, where he is at in his development today on November 20th, I think there really is an argument he's the closest to a major league reliever of this group. This is a fastball that can get into the upper 90s. He's got really good velocity and also has a really nice kind of, I call it a changeup. Some people call it a splitter. We used to do Michael Fulmer for longtime listeners. We used to call his slider the cutter slider thingy. Then Matt Manning had the changeup splitter thingy. I guess that's kind of in the same vein as Matt Manning there, but he's got a nice secondary offerings as well with that, and then a kind of a hard-nosed slider. Then the velocity is high on all of those. He doesn't throw anything less than 85, 86, 87 miles an hour. So, when you look at how bullpens are shaped and built in today's day and age of baseball, I'm just fairly confident if they didn't protect Tyler Owens, he would have been taken in the Rule 5. Command is something that he's going to have to develop more of. I'm not sure he's going to be in the majors like on opening day this year, right? But he'll be in the conversation throughout the season. He may debut at some point next year. And I just think when you look at the modern day relief pitcher, it looks a lot like a guy that can pump high 90s and his off-speed stuff is still high 80s, low 90s, right? It's all velocity these days. It's all now. His strikeout numbers could be better. That is one thing with him. Given I'm pumping the tires a ton on his stuff and his velocity, his strikeout numbers weren't as staggering as you would think, given the numbers that I've just relayed to you. But I think the ceiling is there, and I think he is absolutely worth adding to the 40, not letting another team get his hands on, using your own really, really good, now proven, confident pitching development program to work with a guy like him. And I think that there's a chance that he could end up being a pretty darn good reliever someday. Who did the Tigers remove from the 40-man roster? Eddys Leonard, Brendan White, and Ricky Vanasco. We'll start with Vanasco because I think that's probably the shortest conversation. He's a fine depth arm to have, and he will find work, absolutely. He may even stay in the organization. We'll see what happens. But I just think the Tigers are in a position where, because of that pitching development I just mentioned and how good it has become, where they just have a lot of better arms to choose from at the end of the day. Now, I would have DFA'd Mason Englert before Ricky Vanasco. Vanasco's still only 26 years old, but we can talk about that a little bit more in a second. I think just with some of these guys, it's just like, okay, like you're not bad. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just the Tigers organization can develop pitching really, really well now, and there's guys with much, much higher end stuff that we need to see if we can make something out of. So no issue with that. Brendan White, we talked a little bit yesterday, only 5 or 6 innings pitched total this season. 26 years old. I think his birthday was actually this week. Struggled in the majors to an extent in 2023 when he last pitched. Obviously had a lot of injuries this year, so ended up not pitching too terribly much at any level in the 2024 season. This dude has a ton of spin, and I was really excited when they added him to the 40 when this happened 2 winters ago, and he was protected from the Rule 5. So a lot of spin, a slider that moves a ton, and I think somebody that could also be kind of a righty specialist. But the command was just all over the place at the major league level. And then this year we didn't see him play. So I have somewhat of faith that he's going to stay in the organization. Somewhat. That is just maybe I'm just trying to convince myself of that because I don't want to lose him. But I think that there's definitely a chance another organization looks at the spin rate that he has on his slider and goes, if he's even remotely healthy, we'll try to rehab with him and get him back to that level. Because mid-90s fastball with that slider, I still firmly believe there's a good major league reliever in Brendan White. Big fan of his and really hoping that he can stay in the organization despite being DFA'd. And then kind of the slightly more controversial name here was Eddys Leonard was DFA'd by the Tigers. This is one that when I first read the name, I went, whoa. And then I thought about it for a second and I went, okay, that actually, we probably should have seen this coming and it makes a ton of sense. He had a 781 OPS this year, dealt with some injury stuff and has really questionable defense. This might be another guy that is kind of positionless with the Tigers organization offensively is like very quietly kind of full of, and that's not something you ever want. But he did have an OPS over 900 for the Tigers post acquiring him from the Dodgers at the deadline in 2023 and showed a lot of really encouraging signs in spring training before his injury. This is really simple. This is not rocket science. This is actually a really simple reason as to why Leonard was chosen as one of the players that was DFA'd. He is out of major league options. So when you're out of major league options, you either have to make the majors or you get DFA'd and put on waivers and you have to clear waivers to then stay in the organization anyway. So like, unless you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I can't believe they DFA'd Leonard and whatnot. If you're sitting there, unless you are 100% confident that he would have been in the major leagues come spring training, then this was going to happen anyway. And they were just getting out ahead of the inevitable. And I don't think he would have been a Major League Baseball player for the Detroit Tigers on opening day this season. And he would have needed to be in order to justify keeping him throughout the entire winter. So I really don't have too much of an issue with this either. I still like the player. I hope he can stay in the organization as well. I hope they can continue working with him because he did show some really solid, signs of life over the last year and a half. But, this is how the offseason moves, man. Like if you're out of options, you're out of options. There's not really anything anybody can do about that. And I don't think that he has earned a major league roster spot on like opening day. Again, it's not like, oh, well, what about like in June? No, it has to be, he has to make the opening day roster. And I don't think that the roster currently has a spot for Eddys Leonard on it. So here we are. Hoping he can stay with the organization, though. Really like all three of these guys, but we'll see what happens there. Let's talk about some players that weren't protected, and then we'll talk about some smaller stuff around the league as well. We'll do all of that right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in, as always. So let's talk about the players that are not protected from the Rule 5 draft. There's, a ton, right? Everybody that fits that criteria that wasn't added to the 40-man. So we're not going to go through literally every single name. But as we talked about yesterday, I think Andrew Navigado has somewhat of a chance of being taken in the Rule 5 by another team, maybe a bottom of the barrel team that needs to fill a roster spot, is willing to take a chance on somebody who just hit really well in the minors and has a little bit of positional versatility. I'm going to hope not, though. Gage Workman, we talked about yesterday as well, had a fantastic second half of the season and has shown to be a pretty solid defender. So he's somebody to keep an eye on there for sure. Those are, I think, kind of the big two. Obviously, when it comes to outfield, like Roberto Campos is somebody did not make the cut yet again. Not expected to, but I think it's getting closer and closer to, decision time on him. That'll probably be a next winter thing. And then there's just a ton of pitchers. Like the pitchers aren't even almost worth going through. Like Liam Hicks maybe is a guy, we talked about him, catcher a little bit yesterday, but the pitchers, like anybody could take a pitcher. Like pitchers are there's 80 million of them that are going to be eligible for the Rule 5 draft. And like any of these guys, any team in baseball could just be like, oh, like, we think we can make him a major leaguer. Right. It's just, I think if I'm picking the most intriguing names out of there, obviously Montalvo, we talked about a lot yesterday. Austin Bergner had a pretty solid 2023 campaign. So I think that he's someone, maybe RJ Pettit, we talked about a little bit yesterday, got some velocity on him as well. I think maybe the most interesting pitcher to me is Andrew Magno, who was a guy that I thought was going to get protected in 2023 and then kind of had like a step back, a little bit of injury, kind of plateau season this year, and now it goes unprotected again. I wonder if another team, he's a lefty as well, that always helps. I'm wondering if maybe a team takes a chance on him, but we will preview the Rule 5 draft when it actually happens in the middle of December. We'll spend much more time talking about who the Tigers could take. We'll look around the league, everybody that was unprotected, and talk about if the Tigers end up doing anything in the Rule 5 and who we could lose, obviously, as well. Other news around the league, qualifying offers were due. Well, the decision on qualifying offers for the players was due on Tuesday as well. There were 13 qualifying offers offered, and 12 of them were declined, which means we do have a rare qualifying offer acceptance. Nick Martinez accepts the QO. It's going to be a 1-year, just over $21 million a year contract for him to stay with the Cincinnati Reds. That's an interesting one. Looking at his contract situation, it almost, and I don't know anything, and this is like totally fine if this is what happened. But I almost wonder if the Reds organization and him kind of worked out a deal where they were like, hey, Martinez is like, I want to opt out and get more money because I had a really good year and was a very valuable part. He was a reliever, and then they had their rotation. A lot of players in their rotation get hurt. So then he ended up starting and he was still fine. Like, he was pretty valuable. But like, he's 33, 34, maybe even. Like, I'm not sure how many teams are going to give him a long-term deal either. So maybe he was just like, yo, why don't I opt out of this? Because I have a player option. And then you guys can just offer me the qualifying offer and I'll accept it. And it'll be a 1-year deal. And it's going to make me, over $20 million next year. But because I know that I'm not going to get a long-term deal. That's like kind of where my brain went with this. Like, oh, he's got the opt-out. He pitched in Japan for a year or two. Like, just a lot, mid-30s. I think there's a lot of signs that are pointing to maybe the organization being like, hey, why don't you just like opt out and accept this? And this will be your makeshift, pseudo contract extension there. So good for Nick Martinez for, going through all of that, coming back and getting a $20 million a year contract in his name. Good for him. All the rest of the players are Willy Adames, Pete Alonso, Alex Bregman, Corbin Burns, Max Fried, Teoscar Hernandez, Sean Manaea, Nick Pivetta, Anthony Santander, Luis Severino, Juan Soto, and Christian Walker. Those are all of the players that declined their QOs, which means, forgot an S there, if your Detroit Tigers or anybody aside from the team they are currently on, signs them to a contract, that team gets draft compensation, and the team that signs them loses a high draft pick. So anytime you're thinking about, I want Pete Alonso, I want Christian Walker, sign Juan Soto, Teoscar Hernandez, we had that conversation, Willy Adames, right? Alex Bregman, Corbin Burns, all the names I just read. I don't know why I'm repeating myself. But, anybody I just listed there, if you sign them, you are forfeiting a draft pick. Now, for pretty much all of these guys, you're talking about a good enough player where, like, that's more than worth it. Do I care about a potential second-round pick if I get Juan Soto? No, dude, obviously not. And I'm sure that most would agree about a lot of the other names in there as well. So just something to keep in mind. Manager of the Year was announced on Tuesday as well. AJ Hinch finished in third place. Stephen Vogt received 27 of the 30 first place votes. Matt Quatraro had 19 of the second place votes, 2 first place votes. AJ Hinch received 1 first place vote and a majority of the third place votes. So he sits comfortably in third, Quatraro comfortably in second. And Vogt wins it 3 votes away from unanimously. A lot of people are, we got kind of fired up and kind of riled up about it. I don't really care, man. Like, Manager of the Year is such, I'm not trying to be like too dramatic about it, but it's honestly like such a scam. Like, Manager of the Year is, AJ Hinch has never won Manager of the Year, for starters. Manager of the Year over the last decade has pretty much just become the team that exceeded our expectations the most, right? Like Don Mattingly won Manager of the Year in the COVID season of 2020 and then got canned within like 16 months of that. Like, they don't use like, AJ Hinch had, didn't have a rotation and had a below average offense and went on a run and whatever. Like, they don't care. They literally are just like, oh, well, we didn't think the Guardians were going to be very good. And then they were like, a win away, 2 wins away from the best record in the American League. That's super impressive. So it's, Cleveland's the surprise team of the year. Now, all 3 of these teams, that's why they're the top 3, because they're probably the 3 biggest surprises in the American League. All in the AL Central, mind you. AL Central supremacy. Shout out my dogs. But Kansas City lost over 100 games last year and made the postseason. Like, yeah, man, like that, they're going to get Manager of the Year votes. That's just how the award works. So I don't care. I don't think AJ cares. I don't think the organization cares. Like this is, to me, of all of the awards that are given out, manager of the year means comfortably the least. Like if you're think about it this way, okay? If you are on the Hall of Fame ballot as a manager, has anyone ever in the history of the world ever been like, oh, well, this guy didn't win any manager of the year awards, so not a Hall of Famer? No, dude. Like people do that with MVPs and with World Series rings and with Cy Youngs and All-Star appearances. Not a soul cares about this award. And I know it sounds like I'm mad, but I'm I'm kind of just like level. I promise you, I don't care that he lost. It's just the award doesn't mean anything to me. So if he would have won, I would have relayed the same message. I've been saying this for my entire time on this show. I have this conversation about manager of the year. It's a long-standing rivalry I have with Major League Baseball is the manager of the year award. If they actually changed it to use any sort of logic or reasoning for like how the game is actually managed in their decision, then I would take it a lot more seriously. But for the last decade, it's pretty much just been who was the biggest surprise. Boom. Okay, now that I'm done with that rant that I didn't expect to go on, Josue Briseño wins the Arizona Fall League MVP. He is also the first Triple Crown winner in the circuit's history. I think that's super, super cool. So we talked about him winning the Triple Crown last week. Didn't mention that he had won the MVP because the season hadn't wrapped up yet. So here we are. This guy is someone that AJ Hinch last spring, when very few people knew who Briseño was and he wasn't really on anybody's radar, he had said that he was developing a man crush for him and that he really, he just hits the ball really hard everywhere and is becoming a huge fan of his. So someone to keep an eye out for, like truly. And I think, sticking at catcher is probably a little bit of a question mark, but he played first base in the AFL. And we all know how first base is currently going for the Tigers at the major league level. So only other thing I got for you is just keep an eye out Tuesday. That's not the right day. Wednesday, rather, at 6 p.m., we have the Cy Young Awards announced. I don't think that award is a scam. I don't know why I got so angry there. Truly, I really started seeing red. That got a little crazy there. I did not expect to get that fired up over manager of the year, but Tarek Skubal is going to win the American League Cy Young. Truly, the only reason to tune in is just to figure out if he wins it unanimously or not. So we will see that, and we will celebrate that on tomorrow's show when he inevitably and certainly does win the award. Non-tender deadline will be Friday. We'll talk about that the rest of the week. All right. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shouts to everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope, and I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.